All right, so today is going to be an interesting episode. Let me give you guys a riddle. What do you get when you have a Locked On NHL host cross paths with a Locked On NBA host who also hosts a Devils podcast for a different platform? You get a rocking crossover. Adam Armbrecht of Locked On Nets and also the host of Puck Luck, a Devils podcast for the Hockey Podcast Network, is accompanying me on today's very interesting crossover. There's a lot to talk about with Adam. We're going to talk about the NHL. We're going to talk about the Devils. We're also going to give some NBA talk because I'm a huge basketball fan as well. So buckle up for this compelling collaboration.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Now, this is an interesting crossover because joining me on today's show, he is the co-host of Locked On Nets, a part of Locked On NBA. It is Adam Armbrecht. Now, Adam, aside from being a great host here at Locked On, you also host a Devils podcast for the Hockey Podcast Network, and I just want to say I've done collaborations with them in the past. So I don't know if you know my buddy Neil Villapiano. He's the host of Devil State of Mind podcast. He also works with that same network. So I was just like, you know what? We both work at Locked On, and you also host a Devils podcast. So the opportunity was just too good to pass up. And I'm a big NBA fan as well.
Yeah, no, Neil's fantastic. We've crossed over with him as well. Does great work for the Devils State of Mind. And then, like you say, when you're on the Locked On Network, there's just opportunities to collaborate and cross over. And this actually does represent the first time that we've done one with an in-state, in-region show of another sport. So I was really excited when you reached out because I think that, man, the crossover of fan bases, it has to exist here, even if you happen to be wearing, I think, a Lakers jersey, which we can get into that a little bit later.
Big LeBron fan. A lot of people know that. But yeah, so I think this is the first time that anyone from Locked On NHL has done a collaboration with someone outside of the Locked On NHL network. So now like I said, you work for Locked On NBA covering the Nets. So we'll talk about the NBA in the third and final segment, but let's talk about the meat and potatoes of this episode. Let's talk about the New Jersey Devils. Now, I've had the chance to speak with a lot of Devils content creators the last few weeks. I literally just did an episode with Ken Danico prior to recording with you. I spoke with Christy Flannery of the Hockey News. She's right now in Switzerland, hanging out with Nico Hischier. Spoke with my buddy Jersey Joe, who writes for Pucks and Pitchforks and hosts his own Devils podcast. Also talked with Sam Wu, the host of Let's Go Devils. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked a lot of them, which was, what are your initial thoughts to this historical season? Like, was it a success?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no world where it wasn't a success, right? I mean, you go back and think about expectations coming into the season. We know what the Devils, from a franchise standpoint, what the timeline was. We know the young talent they had. But I think making the playoffs was, boom, check this box. And you wanted to see that just based on paper and the talent you had. But getting that series win over the Rangers, I think that as this team progressed through the year, you elevate what you'd like to see them do. But we said over on the show with my co-host, Danny McDonough, that while it always hurts whenever you exit the playoffs, when you took the step back, this to me was hands down a massively successful season for the Devils. And you jumped your timeline forward, arguably by a season, maybe even a season and a half, at least relatively where you thought some of the development and growth and expectations just from a win and loss standpoint stood for this team.
Yeah, so what were your expectations going into the season? Because I said at most a wild card team, because I was cautiously optimistic because I was like, okay, you got Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, and Jesper Bratt. They're primed to take a few steps forward. It seemed like they fixed their goaltending tandem. Originally, it was supposed to be Vitek Vanacek and Mackenzie Blackwood. And obviously, Akira Schmid came into the mix, and we had some other question marks in regard to like someone like Dougie Hamilton, who was out for a majority of his first year with the Devils. He was primed to have a bounce back kind of year. I personally didn't think Lindy Ruff was a problem. He just wasn't given good circumstances to try to thrive and win consistently. And like I said, I just got off a call with Ken Danico, and he said, like, your team is not set in October. The team that you have in October is not the same team that you'll have in March. So I think he was sending a message to Devils fans saying, like, don't jump the gun too early. So just wanted to hear your thoughts. What were your thoughts going into the season?
Yeah, it's similar to you, right? I think you wanted to be, it feels so funny to say it now, like looking back, but be a plucky team, be a pesky team, surprise some teams, and make the playoffs. And at that point, when you think especially about the way the Metro has been building out, the way the Bruins were heading into that season, it'd be really hard to say that the team at the start of the year was going to surprise someone in the playoffs and maybe go similar to what the Florida Panthers ended up doing, right? Going on a run like that. And you mentioned some key guys in there, and including Lindy Ruff, by the way, from a head coaching standpoint, right? It goes from fire Ruff to sorry Ruff. Like there was a time when the different sample sizes, mixing and matching lines, not having consistent, pairings was so frustrating for the fan base. But the reality was that that's what you needed to do throughout this year. Now, things, of course, shift once you get to the deadline. But I agree with you. A guy like Dougie Hamilton, well, now he has back-to-back 73-point seasons under his belt. Jack Hughes takes a massive leap forward. So coming into the year, be pesky, be developmental, figure out what's going on in the goal. Akira Schmid ends up being a big surprise. But, yeah, fighting for a playoff spot, that was my expectation. And I think it shifts, right? And it shifts very early when they go on the winning streak throughout this year. I think the balancing point was to see they had a long losing streak. And that's where you knew that this team was showing you a lot of what they're going to be, but still had some things to grow with. And then also had some areas that they needed to improve, as we saw from Fitzgerald this offseason.
Absolutely. And they came buyers at the trade deadline, got Timo Meier, got Curtis Lazar. And during the offseason, they were able to make a splashy move that I didn't see coming at all. It just came out of left field. I was not anticipating it at all. They traded Yegor Sharangovich, a pending RFA, and a third-round draft pick for Tyler Toffoli. And Toffoli has a track history of winning. He was a part of that LA Kings team that won the Stanley Cup back in 2014. So obviously the expectations are a little higher. I think a lot of teams underrated the Devils last season. And I can understand why people were just saying the Devils weren't going to be all this or that. It was just because injuries were a problem. The development of their young players was a problem. They missed some key impact guys during the offseason, but they were able to get some veteran pieces like Andre Palat, Brendan Smith, Eric Haula, and you got some glue pieces that were able to take your organization to another level, because I think a lot of people underestimate the true impact that a veteran has. Because look at someone like Brendan Smith. I didn't understand Brendan Smith's impact on the team until I actually spoke to him during exit interviews and got to get a good insight as to why he is so beloved, or why Lindy Ruff trusts him. Is because if you just hear him speak, he just speaks like a coach. He just gets it. And I was just like, you know what? You need a player like that. And do I want him on the rink for 80 games? No, I'm not going to go there. But at the same time, I see how vital he is in the dressing room. But if you want to talk about a player who is both good on the rink, but also good in the locker room, look no further than Eric Haula. And Haula's had somewhat of a turbulent history in the NHL. People go back to his days with the Carolina Hurricanes and just say he was a cancer. The fans have turned on him there, but he comes here. He was really good in the locker room. He was able to help develop Jack Hughes a little bit more by being paired alongside him. So, yeah, I mean, when people were just like thrashing on Eric Haula, similar to what I was early on in the year, because I didn't understand his true impact, after a while, I just saw, oh, that's why he's out there. He's doing faceoffs. He's doing special teams. He's working the corners. He's playing aggressive. He's taking the burden off of Hughes' shoulders so that way Hughes can develop. So I think Haula was definitely an essential piece to pick up. But yeah, this team has taken leaps and bounds of improvement, like you just said. Now, it leads to my next question. Of all the players who had big years, I probably already know what your answer is going to be. Who was the MVP of the team?
I
And
mean,
don't
it's
be
easy to
afraid.
say Jack.
Don't be afraid to say something other that you said, Jack Hughes.
No. I mean, I think it's easy to say him, right? But I also would say in that same breath, kind of your point, like if you think about what this team needed, and it's so funny we talk about veterans like that. It's not about the stats. As great as that year was, there were times throughout the season when it was like, man, Jack, you got to pull the trigger. Jack, you can't put that puck on your stick and try to go zone to zone here, and kind of overskate yourself out of really good opportunities. Still a growing process for him. You look at a guy like Dougie Hamilton, one of the most offensive-minded defensive players. He's a veteran for this team, as you mentioned, like needing that type of leadership. And then you can even look at a guy like Nico, captain of this team. Sometimes I think when you look at any roster, any sport, you're always going to go with the flashy numbers, and that's where Jack Hughes comes to mind. But you also have to look at the guys you don't mention a lot. Why? Because they're playing consistently, because they're giving you the performances that you need that afford a guy like Jack Hughes to be this free roaming player, to make these massive plays. So, I mean, I'll go with any number of veterans that I think quietly, and even young guys, but that are captains, that really provided consistent baseline to afford some young guys to make big showcases for themselves. A guy like Ball, who comes back now on that 2-year contract, to say, I'm a young player, but I can be a part of this team going forward. That's the balance that I think the Devils did a nice job last year striking, and actually what they accomplished again this offseason, because now the next wave, and I know I'm jumping here, but it's like, who has the breakout year upcoming? Well, it can be Luke Hughes now, because you brought in other veterans to help him develop the non-offensive side of his game so that he has that same production, same type of leap in his style of play that we saw from Jack Hughes this past year.
Yeah, I mean, Luke was able to show out in the playoffs, especially in Game 5 against the Hurricanes. He played 20 plus minutes, and he didn't look fatigued or tired at all. He was in the right spot, the right opportunity. And when I asked him during exit interviews, I said, one of the concerns that a lot of people had was that you are a good offensive player, but your defense was a huge question mark. And he said spending an extra year at the University of Michigan really helped him develop his game, because he knew what he needed to work on. And so he credits the staff in Ann Arbor for helping him just clean up his defensive game a little bit, because the scouting report when he was selected by the Devils was that he gets a little too jumpy on the defensive side of things, and it puts him out of position. Now, we're in a day and age where defensemen with 100-plus points, they're going to win the Norris Trophy, despite maybe being a turnover machine. So, look at Erik Karlsson, with no disrespect to Karlsson, but it's just his offense is great. I'm not going to deny that. But his defense, that's a little iffy. But we're in a day and age where defensemen are more valued on the offensive side of things versus defense. So we don't see players like Ken Danico come around too often. We don't see players like that who just focus squarely on being aggressive. But if you look at the Devils, they got John Marino, they got Jonas Siegenthaler, and also Kevin Ball, guys who are not going to rack up the offensive numbers, but they are definitely going to hold their fort on the blue line. So there's more to talk about, Adam. But before we continue, I want to talk with you about Bird Dogs. So Bird Dogs makes you look good. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit better than regular shorts are made of stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so that way you can get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So I don't know about you, Adam, but I go to school in Arizona. It gets hot out there, so I got to wear some stylish shorts. But at the same time, I need to be able to breathe a little bit, because that sun, it beats down, but I got to look stylish. But at the same time, got to be protective.
Bird Dogs, man, have been for the win.
So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or promo code LockedOnNHL for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, I promise you. And I guess if you want to use another code, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA for that same offer. Okay, so let's move on from MVPs to an underrated asset. Who is a player that was good, but may not get the recognition they deserve? The unsung hero, if you would.
That's a good question. It's funny because we've talked about going forward now, and I actually think, especially when you go back and look at the Rangers series, Timo Meyer acquired at the deadline. I think people had a perception of what they wanted to come immediately be. If you extrapolated his numbers out, it's actually going to be a really great season going forward for him. But the physicality really mattered for that team on the defensive end of the ice in terms of offensive players tracking back, and then also what he could do in front of the net. So all the sample sizes were there. But if we're going season long, I think it's really easy to John Marino and say it's not going to put up massive numbers on the offensive side, but plays consistently, especially when you have offensive-minded defensemen. I'll go with John Marino as just being a guy that, again, I mentioned earlier, who, if you don't mention him a lot, it probably means that he's functioning properly game in, game out. So I'll go with Marino.
John Marino, great choice. And once again, he was paired alongside Luke Hughes in Game 5 of the Stanley Cup playoffs against the Hurricanes, and he was an absolute warrior because at one point he was bleeding like real badly on his nose, and he didn't want to come out the game. But the referees did warn him. He said, if you can't stop the bleeding, you have to come out. And he was able to do so. He put like 2 giant gauzes in both of his nostrils. So John Marino and Luke Hughes, I'm excited for that tandem come next year. I'm telling you, because I think the Devils have a good system working for them defensively, because you got Dougie Hamilton and Jonas Siegenthaler. Siegenthaler can focus more on the defense. Hamilton can focus more on the offense. Marino, defense, but Hughes, offense. And then I would say Kevin Ball and Colin Miller. That would be the realistic pairing. Ball, defense. Miller, offense is not his bread and butter, but he's capable of doing it. He just needs to fill the role of Damon Severson, because Severson sort of did that in his final year.
I'm going to tell you right now. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I'm just going to tell you right now, when you talk about Luke Hughes and that pairing, and it's funny, I was calling for him the second that he was eligible. Danny and I debated this about, well, he's young, and you mentioned before some of the defensive lapses. I understood that, but it was, boy, there's just a dynamic here. And specifically, I always thought about the power play, right? The deficiencies that the Devils had on that, and that's what excites me about Luke going into this upcoming season. The tandem between offensive and defensive-minded defensive pairing, I think that's really important for the Devils. And it's been so funny. A couple of weeks ago, we asked the question, what are the expectations for Luke Hughes? And I'm setting it as being a 60-point scorer in this upcoming season between goals and assists. I think a lot of production comes from the power play. Initially, that was like, oh man, are we setting a bar too high? And it is a very high expectation. But over the last couple of weeks, the Devils community discussion has really started to shift in that direction of, if we want to look at Luke Hughes and set a bar of expectations, maybe it should be 45, 50 points as the baseline. But I expect this guy to be absolutely explosive in a completely different way, even from an offensive-minded guy like Dougie Hamilton. Different player in Luke Hughes. Very excited to see him, as you say, getting paired with a defensive-minded guy, someone that showed it in the playoffs, veteran, can be responsible and allow Luke to really thrive.
That's, do you think Luke Hughes can give Connor Bedard a run for his money and possibly win Rookie of the Year? Question mark?
No, I'm going to say no, because I think that, and it's funny, like I'm setting a very lofty expectation. If I'm being honest, if I think that he can be a 60-point, and especially with real power play value, then I guess I at least have to say he could be in the discussion, right? Now, do I think he'll ultimately get there? No. But the simple fact that we can go into another season with another brother Hughes and say they're capable of having at least that goal in mind, that has to get the Devils fans excited. But no, I don't think he ultimately achieves it. Maybe it has to just come down to what the two-way value is, where it is more offensive-minded. Maybe that's enough by today's NHL standards. We'll have to see.
Speaking of which, speaking of family, the Devils actually just signed Cal Foote, who is the brother of Nolan Foote. Two-way deal. This is more of a move for the Utica Comets, but just wanted to bring that up while we were on the subject of brothers. But now let's move on to X Factors. So someone who's in that happy median of an MVP and an unsung hero, someone who might see his name in the news time and time, but at the same time, not as consistently as maybe a star player. Someone who had really good impact for the Devils and sometimes gets the recognition they deserve, but more times than not, sometimes they get overshadowed. Who is that X factor player?
Yeah, and maybe X factor would be overstating it, but I like looking at a guy like Bastion. I associate him as a veteran presence where you could end up being paired on a young line. We may or may not end up, although honestly, so I'll highlight here 6 goals, 9 assists in those 43 games. I think seeing him have a full, healthy season is going to be good for him. But I actually will define a better X factor, and that's Alexander Holtz, right? Tomas Tatar is gone, and there is production that needs to be made up. As it stands right now, Holtz is going to be in one of those top combinations there. So it's a high bar of expectations for him. But if he comes in and starts pushing towards that 20 goal scoring mark and make them just absolutely dangerous across the board. So I'll actually go with Holtz as being the X factor because he seems to be the guy in this moment that has the clearest path to have a very defined and consistent role out of the gates. It'll be up to him to take care of that opportunity.
Oh, Alexander Holtz. Now that's interesting because the people in the Utica Comets front office and also the Devils front office during exit interviews, they had a serious discussion with them. According to Ryan Novozinski of NJ.com, Novo said that basically what was brought to Holtz's attention is that he needs to step up his game. Otherwise, he's going to be benched or maybe, just maybe, he'll get traded because I think Holtz dodged a major bullet after that Timo Meier trade. I was expecting for him to be in that deal, no ands, ifs, or buts about it. But I was stunned to realize that he was still on the roster. So I said it in my episode weeks ago. This is possibly Holtz's last chance because here's the thing. It's a little before I'll let you speak momentarily. Let me just say this. Holtz does well in Utica. That's why the Devils are holding on to him. It's not like he's like just crapping the bed in Utica. But the problem is like he's just the victim of the Devils' success because they don't have any patience for the young guys in that regard. Because I spoke with Kevin Ball and he said that he feels more prepared, but he doesn't feel comfortable because he knows he doesn't show that consistency. Similar to Fabian Zetterlund, he'll be dealt away. Similar to Alexander Holtz, he'll be a healthy scratch. So it's interesting. I think Holtz's time is running out a little bit, and you can't keep him in Utica forever.
And to your point, because I think you're 100% correct. So if we think about and maybe X factor, putting him in the wrong category, it's a guy that's on the bubble, but there's an X factor element to him. If he shows up and plays well with an opportunity at the start of the year, it does end up becoming, you could play well. And at the deadline, when the Devils look out and say, what do we need? He may be another first name that gets mentioned there. If he struggles in that sample size, then it is be back into the AHL, and then it's going to be right back into those same discussions. So this is your opportunity to be an impact for this roster. And if not, it's going to look obviously dramatically similar to the way it did last deadline. And you mentioned it. Him surviving the Timo Meier trade was surprising. They didn't really give up a lot that felt like they were sacrificing some young talent or young player that they wanted to keep in the fold. It was impressive by Fitzgerald. So I think that Holtz is on a clock here. So intriguing X factor, but I think you're correct. It's like this can go one way or the other very quickly for Holtz. He's going to have a clock ticking down on him when the season starts.
Absolutely. So what are your expectations going into the new year? So I think we're at a point in the offseason where things start to slow down a little bit. We saw Erik Karlsson get dealt away a few days ago, but now that domino piece has fallen, I think most teams will take it easy until training camp, preseason, and then obviously the start of the new NHL year. So I think we're at a point where we can start to gauge as to like how teams are shaking up, what direction they're trying to go in, because the Hurricanes are still the team to beat. The Penguins are in win now, but I don't know if it's going to help them. The Flyers and Blue Jackets, I'm not even thinking about them. Washington Capitals, it's like they're getting close to just saying, you know what, Alexander Ovechkin is going to do what he can do, but he's not that guy he once was. Father Time is undefeated for a reason. So it's just like the Washington Capitals, their time might be running out, but I think the team to beat out in the Metro is in fact the Carolina Hurricanes for the Devils.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's going to be the two-horse race. I think it's going to be similar to last year, right? Back and forth. The key matchups head to head are going to matter here. And if you just think about the Metro overall, it's not creating a line of delineation, but it very well could be that, like, those top two teams, that's the battle. Everyone's going to be close there. But we just talked about our expectations inside the Metro. I think Pittsburgh does take a little jump up here. Remember, finished just 2 points behind the Islanders. I think the Islanders are going to take a step back here. I won't be surprised if you're watching the Rangers, who I also think take a marginal step back by a few points when we look at the end of the season. Them and the Penguins, I think, are battling in there around the 3 and the 4 spot. So if I had to call it right now, listen, I'm always going to say the Devils have a great chance to win the Metro. But if I said it finishes Canes, Devils, even maybe the Penguins, if they stay healthy with that veteran talent and a couple of good moves this offseason, and then seeing the Rangers slip in there and the Islanders actually fall out. But I think this is going to be the Canes and Devils race. It's going to be consistency, wire to wire, where you don't worry about some of those lulls. It's going to be impressive, man. And I expect the Devils to be right in that same kind of area coming down to the end of the season. Remember, led the division in terms of plus-minus goal differential here. It may just come down to defensively if they clean up the goals that they surrendered, and then that gets between the pipes, between Schmid and Vitek, obviously.
So let's move on from the NHL and talk about the NBA because, like I told you at the beginning of this recording, I am a big NBA fan. I would presume that for any of my audience who do follow the NBA, they probably would follow the Brooklyn Nets because Brooklyn was originally the New Jersey Nets before relocating in 2012, 2013. So, but I still think Brooklyn is New Jersey's team. So, how are the Brooklyn Nets looking? Because you guys, let's just face it, you guys have been very unlucky the last few years because you had Kyrie Irving, you had Kevin Durant, you had James Harden. Unfortunately, none of that worked out. You dealt Durant to the Suns. Kyrie forced his way to the Dallas Mavericks, and James Harden is now looking to force his way out of the Philadelphia 76ers organization. So, curious to hear your thoughts. Like going into next season, are the Brooklyn Nets going to be any good? Because I know you guys didn't you sign one of our players, Lonnie Walker the fourth?
Yep, we got Lonnie Walker in the fold there. He's going to be in the mix for some backcourt minutes. He has some three-point shooting. The Nets got rid of a lot of older veteran players like Seth Curry, like Joe Harris. They are defensive sieves, but they're high-level three-point shooters. But the reality for the Nets is you have Mikal Bridges, you have Cameron Johnson. They're playing in FIBA right now. They're looking phenomenal. Yes, this is a team that I think will make playoffs in the upcoming season. Now, do they avoid the play-in scenario of the 7 through 10? Ben Simmons, he's still on this roster. They're paying a huge amount of money to somebody, and his name is.
It seems like it's. Oh, I hate to interrupt you. It's wash, rinse, and repeat for Ben Simmons, which is you have high expectations for him during the offseason. These workout videos start to make their way to social media. Going into the year, it's like, okay, he puts up mediocre performances. He'll bounce back. Then, boom, mid-season, he's out with a back injury, and he's out for an extended period of time.
And listen, the reality, and it's true, by the way, and we do this over on Locked On Nets, where like when the cycle comes up, you go in and say, well, what are expectations? Now, technically, the start of this upcoming season will be 18 months removed from the back surgery, and that's the true timeline to fully recover from it. Now, again, this feels like repeating narratives around him getting healthy, but we do talk about him as, especially for a team, for everything they did, what they lack, we know about maybe a little bit of size, but they got very versatile with length when we talk about some of the additions like a Darius Baisley, like a Trendon Watford recently, taking flyers on these guys. But if they're going to come into this season, it still comes down to the point guard play. Right. And when you're the LA Lakers fan and you have LeBron James, that certainly frees up the versatility. Dennis Smith Jr. comes in the door. He's not an offensive player. He's a traditional point guard. Ben Simmons, if he's healthy, can do a lot of those things on the offensive end. And I'll tie it into the Devils. You know, you go back, you said about moving to Brooklyn, the Nets are about a decade, just over celebrating a decade. But remember, the last fun, exciting version of this team was Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie, making that surprising playoff run. It's not dissimilar to a fan base's excitement around what the Devils did this past year, surprising teams. Now, the wealth of talent for New Jersey is way higher, but that's where I think this team is. You need some of these young players like a Cam Thomas, if he gets the opportunity finally, to take a big step forward and show up and have a defined role here. So there is lower expectations than once upon a time with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, but I like these versions of teams. Like, these teams are exciting to watch because every game is an opportunity to see something new, to see someone surprise you. And then as you work through the season, it becomes this anticipation of fighting for the playoffs and maybe trying to battle some teams. Unfortunately, I will say, long-winded. Unlike the NHL, lower seeded teams have a far harder time surprising the favorites in the divisions and in the playoffs. NHL, that's what makes it so exciting. Florida, you can just go on a run and shock somebody because it's a different beast when it gets to those playoffs. But it's a good time to be covering the Nets, man. We had a blast.
I mean, the Miami Heat, they were the 8th seed and they made it all the way to the NBA Finals, albeit they were pretty much doomed for the start when they had to go up against Nikola Jokic and also Jamal Murray. They were absolutely doomed from the start. I wanted them to win because I really wanted Jimmy Butler to get a ring because I think of all players in the NBA, he definitely deserves it. But unfortunately, they just were no match to that powerhouse in Denver. And look, I need to ask you this. This actually just jogged my memory a little bit. When going back to the Devils, do you think the media does a bad job of representing them? Because I think the media did a horrendous job with the Denver Nuggets because a lot of people, and I don't know how you felt, a lot of people were underestimating the Nuggets, but the reality of it is they're not on national television all the time. Like, I don't get the chance to see them as often as I would with the Lakers because I'll admit I'm just a LeBron fan. I'm not a Lakers fan, but I know good enough that the Lakers, no matter how bad they are, they're always going to play like on Christmas Day. They're going to play a lot of nationally televised games because they're such a historic franchise, no matter how good or bad they may be. And people were saying like the Lakers, this is going to be an easy run to the finals for them, including me, because I was like, there's no way Denver is going to beat LeBron and company. And they actually ended up sweeping them. And I'm like, wow, this Nuggets team, I didn't know how good they were. And it's like, I think the same could be said for the Devils. Just because, like, while watching the Stanley Cup playoffs, I noticed that ESPN, they were talking a lot more about the New York Rangers as opposed to the Devils. And I'm like, the Devils are up like 3-2, and now the Rangers tie, it goes to game 7. I'm like, the Devils are blowing the Rangers out. They're about to win game 7. Can you talk about something other than the Rangers? So I think, like, since you also cover the Devils in this case and also the NBA, do you think the Devils are sort of like the Denver Nuggets where the media doesn't really give them the benefit of the doubt?
With the Nuggets, and it's funny because the Joker has been one of the best players, the best player in the league for a number of seasons, and he finally puts it all together. For them, there's a little bit of weight of expectation because you have one of the best players and you would come up, quote, short in a lot of playoff opportunities, but the West has been a beast in the last handful of years. So not winning a championship by X year in his career shouldn't necessarily be to the detriment. For the Devils, it's a both and here. I'll be really interested to see how they get talked about this upcoming season because already this offseason, people are starting to now say this team, watch out for them. When you have a guy like Jack Hughes, that matters. When you have guys like maybe Timo Meyer and the way his production can look this year, I think more eyes will come there. But let's be real. New Jersey in the name, like that just matters. You're considered a small market team. Brooklyn is considered a small market team, even inside of the city relative to the Knicks. And if you are in the Nets case, a team that gets superstars and then has all these little trip points along the way, and you never come anywhere near reaching expectations, maybe you get brushed to the side or the narrative is very driven around what you don't accomplish. From a Devils standpoint, man, that entire Rangers series, Danny and I talked about this. I don't care the way that the team gets covered, by national media per se, but I had a breaking point where I was like, what are we talking about? You're talking about the Devils as being this surprising team right now, and you're spending 20% the time covering this series, talking about New Jersey, and they're about to win the series, right? That was a very frustrating thing, and I think maybe it is. Without enough eyes during the regular season, without enough respect about what they were accomplishing, because remember, everybody said, they're a good team in the regular season, but they're going to struggle when it comes to the playoffs. So maybe this year is going to be a better barometer for whether or not the Devils get the coverage they deserve, the national TV games they deserve, because I think they are going to be a wire-to-wire consistent team. But again, man, some teams across every league, they're not going to be built to have those eyes. Lakers get the coverage. The Dallas Cowboys get the coverage, right? It's just that's the nature of sports. And I'm okay being a, quote, smaller market team that absolutely loves what the Devils do, love what the Nets do, and love covering them game in, game out all season long. So do whatever you want. I love my teams. I'll watch them win.
Yeah, it feels like the only panel on that ESPN table that was actually giving the Devils some legitimate love was PK Subban, former New
Yep,
Jersey
of
Devil,
course.
and he's also
Right.
good friends with Jack Hughes. And the Devils discourse seems to always have PK's back, despite his tenure with the Devils not really going all that well. We still love PK. We just love his personality. We just didn't love his contract. We love PK. We just didn't love his contract. So. Adam, we pretty much talked about everything ranging from the Devils to the NBA, the Brooklyn Nets. And before I let you go, what are the chances of the Lakers winning the NBA Finals this year?
Oh,
Your
I don't know.
Your unbiased opinion.
I would say somewhat slim. If Phoenix is going to be healthy, watch out. Denver's the exact same team. Was that?
Phoenix doesn't have a bench. They have a lot of superstars, yes, but they don't have a real point guard and they have no bench.
Yeah, and it's a fair point, but I think my biggest concern with the Lakers, unbiased, is that LeBron he keeps getting older. That's the nature of time. He keeps getting older, and you can't rely on him for 70 plus games in the regular season anymore. Other guys need to step up. Watching Rui Hachimura for an entire 82 game season with the Lakers is going to be fascinating. I long thought that he was being wasted by Washington, as every player that plays in Washington, happens with them. So it'll be fun to see how the regular season goes. But if I was looking in the pecking order, I at least have Denver. I have Phoenix. They're going to be above them there. The Memphis Grizzlies are an interesting team. Some of the reason why I say unbiased opinion is the Lakers aren't going to win the championship is because the West is an absolute firestorm. We talked about it. The Nets were in the West right now. I'd be talking about good luck making the back end of the play-in game because that's how deep that conference is. And that could be a real roadblock for the Lakers, ultimately making it through the gauntlet of the NBA playoffs. But hey, it's LeBron James, and Anthony Davis is an absolute billionaire now. So maybe the money inspires and they get there. It'll be fun to watch.
Well, factor in the California tax. Unpolitical opinion, of course. Just a little joke. Just a little joke. Please do not tweet. Please do not tweet at me. Do not tweet at me.
Come on.
Yeah. It's just a joke. It's just a joke. That's just a joke I saw on Twitter. But anyway, Adam, thank you for taking the time to do this. This was an interesting crossover because Locked On NBA, Locked On NHL. I think this is the first time this has ever happened, based on my knowledge. But where can my audience find you?
You find us over on obviously YouTube, over on Twitter at Locked On Nets. You can find me at Adam Armbrecht. You can also find at Doug Norrie, my co-host on Locked On Nets. And yes, the Devils Puck Luck podcast. Find us on YouTube and on podcast feeds. There's never too much Devils coverage. I think the Devils community is absolutely fantastic. And I'll shamelessly say, I also cover the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. I don't stop talking on a microphone. So you can find me in all those great places, man. And we should. I think a crossover in season is worthwhile because the NHL and NBA seasons parallel one another, and we could be having a check-in. Are our teams meeting expectations as they work through the upcoming season?
I was actually going to ask you that off camera, but now that you said it on camera, expect a future crossover between Locked On hosts, Locked On NBA, Locked On NHL, shaking hands. Adam, thanks for doing this once again.
Love it, man.